Card number 63, Gil McDougald of the New York Yankees. And I just happen to have this card right here because I've been working on a Yankees video. And this is not a card that comes up very often when people talk about the Yankees or this set, but I like this card a lot. And McDougald was a good player. So anyway, card number 63, that means it's session number 63 of Card Room Live. I see some comments already, and I see some people are already in here. That means you guys are excited, and I know why you're excited. This is going to be a fun one. But I have to remind you guys, this is not a show. This is a hangout for fellow vintage collectors. I like to say that because it takes the pressure off, and also because it really is just meant to be a place for people to get together and chat. And, I definitely try to pay attention to what's happening in the comments. Sometimes we have guests. Tonight we have a guest who's waiting in the wings right now. But most of the time we waste time looking at and talking about cardboard, and through it all, we try to make it time well wasted. So if you're here with us live, you should definitely try to introduce yourself in the chat. I'll keep my eye on it, but I hope the rest of you guys that are in the chat will make new folks feel welcome. If you're listening to this later, whether you are going to or coming home from work, sorting cards, looking at eBay, walking the dog, sitting on the John, wondering if once again, our friend Jesse, Think Blue 77, will ever make another video. Whatever you might be doing, I hope you get something out of it. I hope you have fun and that it passes the time. If you want to get in touch or have ideas for future sessions, you can always email me at bowman53channel@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram. It's Bowman53_Alex. I'm on Twitter, 1953 Bowman Color. And you can always find all that information located in the description below. So, without further ado, let me quickly just see who's in the chat. Rocket Rick is here. Peter is here. Orlando is here. Dan is here. Timeless Cardboard is here. Thank you very much. We had a great group of guests last time. Some of them are here, including Stuke. Reese is here. Jason's here. Hey, speak of the devil. Jesse's here. Larry's here. Terry's here. Rick is here. Rick was in our episode or our session last time. A's Fan Jim. So he's been patiently waiting. This gentleman was in a live stream that we did over a month ago now, which is crazy. And everybody seemed to like it. Maybe they liked it because of the stuff we went over. Maybe they liked it because it was haphazard and all over the place. Either way, we decided to do it again. Here he is, Mr. Doug Kahn. What's up, man?
Hey, thanks for having me again. I'm trying to. I was just saying that my goal is just to not choke. So I'm just trying to act normal now. How am I doing?
Well, the first 10 seconds have gone so well. So
okay,
we're going to be fine, I think. So Doug and I, it was like, I was just looking, it was like late August. We went over the Ramley set. And Doug, do you still have any Ramley cards?
No, I don't have any yet. But they're it's on my list. You
Right.
kind of have to reach high for any card.
True.
So much like what we're gonna cover today.
You do have a really unique artistic representation of a Ramley card.
I do.
Yeah.
And this is thanks to our friend Scott at Reindeer Studios. So this is the famous haircut of Matty McIntyre. I ruined his name. Matty McIntyre. And that is, I think that is the impression you get when you look at his card.
Right. And that's a one of one. So
it's one of one. It's spot on, and it's mine.
And it's yours. Yeah. And so I genuinely had a great time doing this last time. And I thought, hey, why not do it again? Why not have a chat about a set that both of us, or I should say two sets that both of us really like, but neither of us have a card from, which is a running theme. So we are going to talk about, and I have to share my screen here, the 1914 and 1915 Cracker Jack set. Really quick, Doug, who took this photograph of you, and where were you when this
I
opportunity
was at
arose?
I was the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
great, fantastic,
just in August. So just late
nice.
August, the last week of August, I was there. And so I guess it was right after the Ramley video, and I had to, get my face in that because I knew that we were planning on doing this.
Such
Uh,
good planning. Yes.
so I think my daughter took that. Uh,
Nice. Well,
yeah,
shout out to your daughter, and
yeah.
also shout out to Jesse for his stellar work getting me on this other card. We're
Oh,
lucky
cool.
that we have Jesse and we have Scott
Yeah,
generating great stuff for us when we do these things.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, man. I hope the Zach Wheat card was a reprint. Yeah. Don't worry, Rick. It's all digital. We didn't actually mangle a real card. Um, all right, so let's get started. I don't mean to put this on you, um, but Doug, do you want to
Yeah,
start us off on like the history behind these two sets?
yeah, sure. So the Cracker Jack set was these baseball cards were in the famous Cracker Jack treat, which I've heard some people call the first fast food,
Mm,
because you could buy it in bulk, and it was like one of those. They had some kind of motto, like almost like the Doritos, like once you pop, you just can't stop.
right,
That the food is addicting, and therefore you should be addicted. Um,
right,
uh, so in 1914 and 1915, they had these cards. There are some differences. Largely, it's the same. It's the same cards, although the 1914 was a 144 card set, and the 1915 was a 176 card set. Um, the cards in 1914 were a thinner stock and only came in the Cracker Jack box, whereas the cards in 1915 could be mail-in redemptions, where you can, and also they had even they produced an album where kids could post their cards on it. So 1915 is easier to get. There's more of them in higher quality, and I think there's probably more of them in general.
right, and
Um,
that accounts for the staining on the 1914 cards
yes, yes, exactly. So they were in those packs with the caramel and the hot summers, and they didn't have any coating, and they didn't stand a chance.
and sticky kid hands and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, I have some other notes that one thing that I guess I do think is pretty compelling that I would like to note before I even go much further is that it seems like a really, really small percentage of the cards produced um, have made it this far, like some 100+ years later. And that's just in complete circulation, raw and graded, because they made in 1914, they made about 15 million of the
right.
cards. And there's something like a tenth of a percent that seems to be accounted for.
Wow, that's
Um, and that's just the 1914 one because that's where they were more, I think, public about their distribution.
mhm. Did you happen to come across any theories as to why that is? Just people
Uh,
tossing them, or
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, for one thing, they were got all disgusting, right?
yeah,
Another is that people toss them. That I think they were very popular, which is why they came back. But that doesn't mean they would last the test. That they stand the test of time. And one thing I learned about pre-war in general is in World War II there was a paper drive to recycle paper, and none of these cards had any monetary value in
mm,
general. So I would imagine that a lot of pre-war cards in general were recycled for paper drives during World War II.
right, right.
And I'll let you take it now.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so I've got some images to kind of go around, alongside the history that you just shared. So I just kind of went scouring around on the internet and some forums like Net54 and found a couple of images. So this is an advertisement. Um, Gee, wouldn't it be great if it snowed Cracker Jack? Maybe it would be great if that happened. 5 cents. Um, Here's one of the albums that you were talking about. So you could
Hmm.
send away for this and place the Cracker Jack cards in the album. There's another version of it here. You can see it has the phrase and the icon embossed on it. Could not find any photographs. I'm sure there are some out there. I just couldn't find any of the album actually with the cards in it. Um,
Yeah, I read that it's very rare to come across them. They're so it would make sense.
right. Um, Here, let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit. Really great photograph. I couldn't tell exactly where this is. It looks like it might be at like a fairgrounds or something like that,
Hmm.
with Cracker Jack being sold. And you can kind of see that phrase you were talking about. I think it says, "The more you eat, the more you want."
Yes, yes.
Um, Here's another, looks like an advertising photograph with kids holding Cracker Jack. Um, and it doesn't really look like they're enjoying the Cracker Jack,
No,
but
it doesn't. And then the Cracker Jacks look like the boxes look like they're white, which I thought they would. I mean, I know it's black and white, so you can't see color, but they don't look like they're colored.
I think no, they do look like they're all white, maybe with red
Hmm.
lettering. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
They seem a little starstruck by the camera. But that's the time period. I mean, it was probably
Yeah,
pretty rare to get your picture taken. So
yeah.
here's a pretty well-known advertisement. You can find reproductions of this all over the
That's
place.
that's
This is
awesome.
an original. Um,
That's
so it says
fantastic.
Cracker Jack ball players, one of these handsomely colored pictures free in each package of Cracker Jack, the famous popcorn confection. Complete set has 176 pictures of the stars, which would have been what, 1914, I guess.
1915 with
Oh, 15.
176. Yep.
Oh, and it also says the American National and Federal Leagues. I want to get back to that in a second because that's another
Mm.
really cool part about this. Start a collection of your favorite players. Um, Ruckheim Brothers in Eckstein, Brooklyn, New York, and Chicago, Illinois. So yes, and if you look here, you can see that same coloring of the Cracker Jack box. It is white with red
Yeah.
lettering. I found this. This was actually what's left of a shipping carton that was
Mm.
used to ship the Cracker Jack around the country. And again, it says the more you eat, the more you want. And then last little historical photograph here is a Cracker Jack truck
That's
um,
awesome.
hauling Cracker Jack all over the place. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Um, so one of the things that we just came across is it mentioned in this ad um, that you could find both American National and Federal League players, and that's something that I've always found really cool about this set. And I just pulled this book because I immediately thought of it when I started looking through the cards. One of the things that I think is really cool about Cracker Jack is that there's a whole bunch of Federal League cards in the set, and the Federal League is a really fascinating part of the baseball story, and it's right in that time period. So I wanted to mention this book. This is it's called The Outlaw League and the Battle That Forged Modern Baseball. And I'm sure there are lots of books out there about this. I'll just read this really quickly. In late 1913, the newly formed Federal League declared itself a major league in competition with the established National and American leagues. Backed by some of America's wealthiest merchants and industrialists, the new organization posed a real challenge to baseball's prevailing structure, although it struggled for profits. So it goes on and on. But this is a really cool part of the story. And what happened as a result of the Federal League is hugely responsible for what we have now between the American and National Leagues. So the fact that it's kind of immortalized in this set, I think is really cool. So, Doug, any other like sort of tidbits that you want to throw in here before we start to get into some of these players?
Well, I feel like there's definitely there's a lot of really great players in the set.
Yeah,
and we're not highlighting the most obvious.
no, not at all.
So that I guess we can sprinkle that in a little more as it goes. But there is one historical omission. It makes sense that this person's not in it, but could have been in it because they had started baseball already. Babe Ruth. So just imagine there being a Babe Ruth rookie card in this set. That would be remarkable.
Yeah, that would be another card to look at that I would never own, but would always like to see.
And there's a Branch Rickey card in this set, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
I guess he was a manager and he had played a little baseball. So that's a pretty cool card.
Most definitely.
We didn't decide to highlight.
Yeah, another card that we skipped over. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will let you go first. So Doug and I, just like last time with the Renly set, we're going to kind of trade off and take turns kind of highlighting different cards. And out of curiosity, when you chose your cards, what was your criteria?
My criteria was it was partly that partly that the card looked nice, and then to coincide with that, there were some interesting tidbits. There were two of the cards I picked outright because of the card and because I knew who they were already.
Yeah.
So I picked four, and then the other two were because the picture was cool and or the picture struck me, I should say.
Yeah.
And there were some cool factoids about the player.
Right. Okay, same for me. All right, so which guy do you want to start with?
I'll start with Joe Benz.
Okay, here he comes. Joseph Benz of the Chicago
White Sox. Yeah. Was it the Americans? Chicago White Sox. Yeah.
Well, of the American League, yes.
Right. So he looks way better there than he looks in my book.
Okay.
One of the things that struck me about him is he seemed like, he might be like Alfred E. Newman's better looking dad. So yeah, that his picture kind of struck me as being somewhat amusing, but in kind of like a nice classic way. It's not fully comical, but it's kind of wholesome. And he actually turns out that it fits the guy because he was kind of a wholesome, sweet mannered guy. And he actually was a really good pitcher. And he pitched from 1911 to 1919. He was overshadowed by Ed Walsh, Red Faber, and Eddie Cicotte of the White Sox.
Sure.
And he pitched until 19, didn't pitch through 19, so he wasn't part of the World Series scandal.
Okay.
But was familiar with a lot of those players, and interacted with them quite a bit. He never had above a 3 ERA. He had years where he led the team in starts in like 1914 rather. He led the team in starts. He had a no-hitter.
Nice.
Yeah, so he really put up some good numbers in his 9 years. He was born into the meat butchery business. So he had a nickname of Butcher Boy.
Of course he did.
Yeah. So Butcher Boy was his nickname. And he had a good fastball, and he had a quick breaking spitball. So he was a very serviceable player. Also in 1917 World Series winner. he definitely was an asset to the team. He did get. Let me just see the year of his birth. Okay, so that matches up. Okay, he did get a late start. I think for the time, I think it was like 25 or 26. And following the 1913 season, he went on a world exhibition tour organized by Charles Comiskey and John McGraw.
Okay.
And this is where the humor is inserted. That the Chicago newspapers made fun of him because they thought of him as sort of a country bumpkin, and they had articles about the misadventures of Sir Joseph Benz from Batesville Manor. He was from Batesville. So they said the bumpkin abroad that slept through the exotic ports of call, was one headline. Became seasick while riding a camel was another
God.
story they wrote about him, and was mistaken by a tourist for a sphinx. But he apparently took it all in good stride. He was well mannered, and he was also focusing on proposing to his girlfriend, which he did overseas via cable. And then there was all this celebrating when they came back from the World Exhibition, but he jumped ship and went right to Chicago to go with his girlfriend and or his fiance at the time. So he was sort of putting her first. He was excited about getting married. He started to have a tough time putting it together in 1919, and he didn't make it through the year. Maybe lucky for him. And throughout the rest of his life, he was a tavern owner. He was a stationary engineer, which I didn't look up what that means. He was a surveyor, and he was a church custodian.
He did a lot.
Apparently, being a tavern owner throughout. So he was a. So that's our man Alfred E. Newman or Joe Benz.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that because that was the first thing that came to mind when I saw this when I pulled this up for you. I love the story about his travel, and I love how he proposed to his girlfriend. That's smart.
Yeah, overseas. It was in a very kind of exotic way for the times.
Yeah, definitely.
Pretty impressive for a country.
So yeah, right, for a country bumpkin, exactly. All right, Joseph Benz. So I'll jump in here. Let's see. I'm going to do Fred Clark. So I have always really loved this card, just because it's an extremely unusual image. I don't know that you'll find this image on any other baseball card. And so I've always had it bookmarked as like, this is a cool looking card, but I didn't really know anything about Fred Clark. But I've learned a lot about Fred Clark. So Fred Clark started in the southern leagues, including Savannah, which I definitely was intrigued to read about because I live in Savannah. He played in Louisville for a bit, where he was sort of considered very similar in style to Ty Cobb, his play style. He was a demon on the base paths, diving for balls in the outfield, making spectacular catches. He played deep in left field because his Achilles heel as an outfielder was going back on the ball. He was not very good at that. I guess he was prone to crashing into the fence. So instead of doing that, he'd just play against the fence and run in. And because he was fast and agile enough, he could make that work. At one point, the Sporting News said, with the possible exception of Ty Cobb and John McGraw, baseball never knew a sturdier competitor than Fred Clark. He had, at one point in his career, he was sort of at a crossroads, and he had gotten influenced by, this is the part I like the most, he was influenced by veteran players who had questionable lifestyle choices. I mean, this is not surprising. We kind of talked about this with the Ramley set, but basically being a baseball player at that time meant that you were womanizing, you were drinking, maybe you were gambling too. And so he was kind of flirting with all of those bad habits. And then one of the Louisville club management, his name was Barney Dreyfus, he came to him and gave him sort of a talking to or a talking down a dressing down, I guess, and he said basically your career is about to fall apart if you're not careful, and you're never going to get anywhere if you keep this up. You're not going to make the majors. So, however he said it, Clark listened and straightened himself out, and he was picked up by the Pirates in 1899. Went on to have an incredible career with the Pirates for about 16 years. He was a player manager. He helped lead the Pirates to 2 World Series, which they won one of. And they also won 4 pennants, 14 straight division finishes, first place division finishes. And he still holds a bunch of pirate records from what I understand. There's a lot more to him. There's a lot more to this guy. And I'm sure John Mangini or any other Pirate fan would probably be able to weigh in on this more than I could. But what I liked about it was, when I first look at this, I'm just like, this is a cool pose. I like this. But now I see that this was like a player manager who was right on the cusp of like ruining his career, straightened himself out, and really excelled at the game for a good, I don't know, a couple 20 years or so. So that's Fred Clark.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that picture. That's definitely a standout.
I mean, I kind of want to try that, like sit on the bat.
Yeah.
Like that. What's up, Stove? Okay, Reindeer Studios is here, so you'll have to catch the first. You were mentioned, Scott, just so you know, and your card was shown in the first 10 minutes, so you'll have to watch the beginning.
Well, since he was mentioned, and he's here, I think we can now give away the haircut, the Maddie McGinnis haircut.
Really, you want to go to the haircut? Okay, so guys, last time, yeah, we gave the haircut award out. So
yeah, so this is the Maddie McGinnis haircut award. This is who gets the honor here, and for this set, it is our friend Cornelius McGillicuddy. We all know Cornelius McGillicuddy. That's actually his real name. Cornelius McGillicuddy, which is pretty awesome. I almost don't need to say more. But
it doesn't fit on the card, but it is a great name.
Yeah, and I think he said right before, he said a little off the top, please, just before that haircut. And I have to think he was pleased. I have to think he was pleased with that outcome. Yeah, or he was trying to, I think he had a little. He was an early pioneer of the punk rock movement, I think.
I would say he was probably excited to see that they gave him a magenta tinted, hairstyle here, because it does look a little punk.
Yeah, I mean, he got at like a half a shave up top here, right?
Yeah,
we all see that, right? So that I mean, he's worth mentioning, but that's why he's being discussed today. He has the haircut award. Please feel free to look through my work, see if I missed anything. I feel confident that
I honestly, Doug,
the man for the job here.
After you told me you were going to give it to him, I went back and I looked through all the cards, and I couldn't find anybody that would contest this. I think it's the right choice.
No, and it turns out he did a little managing in his day. This fella.
Really?
So yeah. So it turns out that so Connie Mack, as we all know him, is he managed more games than anyone in history. 5 World Series championships. He played a little baseball in the 1800s. He's actually on an old Judge card in 1887, which that would be pretty awesome to get.
Yeah.
So he was at least part owner of the Philadelphia Athletics from 1901 to 1954. He was also well known for having amazing teams and then not being able to afford his players when they came up for contract, or however that worked in those days, and basically needing to get rid of all of his talent. And then
like Jack Berry, for example.
Yeah, like yes, exactly. So he while he has tons of more accolades than you could mention, he also, had to suffer through the bad seasons, and he placed last 17 times in his 50 years, which is quite a lot.
Yes.
Let's see. I know he was. Did I mention he was 6'2"? They called him the tall technician because he
Nice.
was very, very heady, and he also valued players for their intelligence. And this is, I thought this is super interesting. In 1905 World Series versus the Giants, which the Athletics lost, John McGraw said Mac had a big white elephant on his shoulders, or he was carrying a big white elephant, to which Mac made the big white elephant their logo.
So great.
Which is that is a ballsy move. I feel like that's it's so awesome. And I mean, white elephant, I don't think it's a term we use much anymore, but I think it was it was used to mean like troublesome or troubled or burdensome. And I think that Rube Waddell would have something to do with that.
Right.
Rube Waddell, I think he injured his shoulder because he was wrestling. This is in between chasing fire engines.
Exactly. I was just going to say, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty awesome. This, I know that a lot of people know this guy. He coached Eddie Collins, Ty Cobb, Lefty Grove, Jimmy Fox, Rube Waddell. He probably had to sell each and every one of them. So he also, I think he was known for, he was thought of being a cheapskate, but I think that was a mischaracterization because I think he really was just getting by on his ownership of the team, and at that time he just couldn't afford to be competitive at all.
Right.
Sports. There was a sports writer, Red Smith, who said of him, very, very, very lovingly. I just would like to know more about the relationship, but he said he was tough and warm and wonderful and kind and stubborn, and courtly and reasonable and generous and calculating and naive and gentle and proud and humorous and demanding and unpredictable. And I gotta think that those two, were, had a special relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes,
I'm so glad because I mean, I honestly was satisfied with just giving him the hair award, but I'm so glad that you actually took the time to go through because this is a guy that everyone's like, oh yeah, we all know Connie Mack, but it's still always a pleasure to hear all the incredible stuff that
he's pretty amazing.
Done.
He's pretty amazing.
He definitely is, and I had to pull this card. I've shown this card many times, but since we're talking about Connie Mack, it's not a Cracker Jack, but it's a great card.
Ooh, I love it. And that's great.
Yeah, it's such a great shot of him in his element. And hey, he's not wearing his top hat. You can see his hair, although it doesn't look as nice as it does in his Cracker Jack.
I'm not sure he ever had that haircut again. I think it was ill-advised. Someone might have tipped him off.
Yes. Well, there's Mr. Mack. So, all right, my turn. I'll go for another notable. This is probably, of the four cards I picked, this is probably the most notable player that I have to chat about tonight. Armando Marsans. I remember when I was first reading about Cuban players and their entry into the majors. This is a name that I came across. I was very excited to discover that he had a Cracker Jack card. So you can see that he's listed here as being with the Federal League St. Louis team. But Armando Marsans, so he was a Cuban-born player, played in the majors from 1911 to 1918, started in Cincinnati with the Reds in 1911, along with Rafael Almeida, who were among the first Cuban-born players to play in the majors. He was particularly known for being a very aggressive player on the base pass. So he had a knack for stretching singles into doubles and doubles into triples. He also played winter ball in the Cuban League for the Cuban Stars and managed several Cuban teams. This guy has an incredible story. Orlando, who's in the chat, I'm sure could tell a lot more than I could, but I wanted to briefly mention just one part of this guy's career. So in 1914, during spring training, he got into a heated argument with his new manager, Buck Herzog, who accused him of lying about suffering from an injury. Herzog suspended him, and Marsans then demanded to be traded, and his request was refused. And you have to remember that the reserve clause was still firmly in place at this time, so he was running up against the fact that the team was not going to let him go. Then on May 31st, Herzog publicly berated him in the press because he got ejected from a game. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he got ejected. And Marsans responded by basically jumping from his 3-year contract with Cincinnati. He got wined and dined by the owners of the St. Louis Terriers. This is the Federal League team that he eventually, of course, signs with. He signs with the Federal League, which was considered an outlaw league, an outlaw franchise. They were basically kind of luring good players away from the American and National League teams with offers of better pay and so on. So Marsans was offered a 3-year, $21,000 contract by the Federals, which he accepted. There's a lot more to the story, but I mean, he was right in the middle of this whole Federal League thing that was happening, and many other big players, big names were lured in by that at the time as well. But he's got he's got an incredible story, not just being a Cuban-born player, but just his experience getting into the majors and then being right in the middle of that whole Federal League thing. Pretty fascinating guy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's Marsans. Who do you got next?
We can go. How about a Rabbit Moranville?
Love the name. Got to go with Rabbit.
Yeah. And now this one, I really love the picture, and he's one of the two guys I was already familiar with that I picked. I think this is a pretty amazing picture. Probably among my several favorites. So, and he was a very colorful fellow, Rabbit Moranville. We know he's a Hall of Famer. He played for 23 years. Wow. He doesn't have any amazing offensive stats. In fact, he had I think a 256 career batting average. He was 253. He was much more well known for his defense, and he stood at 5'5". In 1917, I should say he started his career in 1912, and this is with the Boston Braves. In 1917, he on the off season he went on a vaudeville show with a couple other baseball players.
Sweet.
And he was reenacting a stolen base play, and he fell into the orchestra on a drum kit and broke his leg and didn't play much the following year. But we know he made up for lost time playing until 1935. So he did pretty well. He's let's see, he has an MVP in 1914. Not MVP. He was among the candidates for MVP, but his stats don't seem to indicate that.
Okay.
It's mostly defensive, it seems. 1914 World Series winner. He was thought to be a clown and a practical joker, or he was a clown and a practical joker, and I think he was also a drunk, which I think raised the volume on his practical jokes. So he used to mimic players who took too long to get ready. He would mimic them during the games and to get everyone laughing. He would step out on the hotel ledges. He would swallow goldfish to entertain people.
Wow.
Yep, part of the Miracle 14. And he would chase teammates through Times Square saying, "Stop, thief!"
Was he friends with Rube Waddell? I mean, goodness.
He should have been. He was actually. This seems like the worst decision ever, but the Cubs made him the manager in 1925. And his only rule for his players was they couldn't go to sleep before he did, which is a winning strategy for sure. So he had a horrible record, and it seemed like it was inevitable that he was going to get canned. And he was apparently he was towards the end of his tenure as a manager. He was standing by the newsstand with the newsboy, saying Moranville fired. Hear all about it. He was like yelling that to everyone, and he wasn't fired. He hadn't been fired yet. He was fired the next day, but at that time he hadn't even been fired yet.
Wow.
So it's pretty funny. In 1927, he resolved to stop drinking. And Branch Rickey said he was a changed man, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame months after his death in 1954. Clearly in 1927 he turned it all around, and he had his 23 years in baseball he had the most longevity until Pete Rose.
Okay.
In
I was
years.
waiting to hear how did this guy get in the Hall of Fame, but I guess it was just
it was the longevity,
power.
the defensive play. Yeah.
All right. Randall. Yeah, some people are saying great card, but it's too expensive. This is not we're not picking out the most budget friendly cards here. We're just picking cards that look good.
Oh yeah, and that card is probably like mid tier,
right,
in that set.
All right, next up for me is Jack Kamnitz, Jack Howie Kamnitz. I honestly just picked this card because I thought it was kind of cool. He's like, I guess he's supposed to be pitching, but honestly, it looked like he's just playing catch, and he just threw it, and he's kind of fallen back a little bit. There's something really great about this image, and you can see here he's with the Pittsburgh Federal team from the Federal League. So Jack Howie Kamnitz, he had a nickname of Rosebud because of his bright red hair, and would be written about in the press as the Kentucky Rosebud. I think he was born in Kentucky. So the Kentucky Rosebud played for Fred Clark's Pirates. I didn't plan that, but that's what happened, who we talked about earlier. And he led the team to the 1909 World Series with a 25 win season, which is still good. Towards the end of his career, when he was lured to join the Pittsburgh Rebels of the Federal League in 1914, obviously that's where he was when this card was made. Once, at some point in his career, I have the date here, Rosebud threw a no-hitter of sorts. So he held New York hitless, I'm guessing the Highlanders, hitless on August 23rd, 1907, in the second game of a doubleheader. The trick was that the game was only scheduled for 5 innings after both managers agreed to just playing a 5-inning game. So he threw a no-hitter, but the game only had 5 innings. I just love that this was up to the managers to decide.
Yeah.
And it's like, sure, let's just do 5 and call it a day.
Yeah.
So that's it. So that's the Kentucky Rosebud. All
right. Cool. Very cool shot. And I think he was mentioned in Citizen Kane.
Of course. Yeah. His card was featured.
Yeah. And then we have Ray Keating of the New York Highlanders.
Here's Ray.
Now this I really like this picture, and it reminds me a little of the Jack Barry T207.
Yeah.
A little bit. He's not quite as ballerina-ish.
No, he's not.
Not quite as elegant, but it's a cool shot. Or a cool pose.
Agreed, yeah.
So Ray Keating was the Joe Niekro of his time, if Joe Niekro was only known for his worst moment. Which is, the the Emery, using a nail filer for
Yeah.
the ball. So, so they called it the Emery ball in those days. So in 1910, Russ Ford apparently pioneered the Emery ball. So good for Russ Ford. He was a Highlander. In 1914, it seemed like the Emery ball was fairly commonplace in baseball. It wasn't there weren't any strict rules against it. There was a $5 penalty if you were caught pitching it, and that was it. So Keating had learned the Emery pitch through catcher Ed Sweeney in 1914, and bringing Connie Mack back into it. The Highlanders were against the Athletics in pitching in 1914, and Eddie Collins could see that Keating was doing something to the ball, and he brought the ump in, and they determined that he was scuffing the ball. But the ump had no jurisdiction to take him out of the game, or there was no precedent for that. It was a $5 fine. So he pitched the game, and he pitched through 9 innings. It wasn't a stellar performance. He was pitching against Charles Bender, also known as Chief Bender, Hall of Famer.
Yeah, right.
And the Highlanders won the game just barely in the 9th inning. And so this ended up being a very bad result for Frank Chance, who was managing the Highlanders at that time. He actually had to resign because it was happening on his watch. Baseball determined, by the time Keating pitched next, baseball determined that there'd be a $150 fine and a 30-day suspension if anyone was caught throwing an Emery ball. So he did a good job of discouraging future people from using that pitch, right, and no longer making it commonplace. So he pitched from 1912 to 1919. Doesn't have a really storied career. However, he did pitch in the Pacific Coast League until he was 41.
Wow.
After that, so he did have quite a career in baseball. He was suspended in the Pacific Coast League in the 1920s for doctoring a ball.
Nice. So he didn't learn anything. That's great.
No, he did not learn a thing. And he operated a tavern in Sacramento, which it seems like, just seems like a rite of passage.
Yes, right. I mean, I was going to say earlier, like, if you weren't doing vaudeville or were somehow involved with the ownership of a tavern, you were missing out at this time, I think.
Exactly.
I got to give a shout out to John Keating from our community, that 70s card show, who recently got this card.
Awesome.
No relation, but I mean, how could you not get a card that has your last name, right? Especially when it's as awesome as this card.
It's so cool, this card.
Yeah.
And he's an interesting guy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, the card matches the story. Which is great. Okay. Let's see here. I think I got one gentleman left. And here's yet another pitching pose, another interesting pitching pose, which is the only reason I chose it. I was like, this is another windup that you just don't see on baseball cards. And really, you don't see anybody do this anymore.
Because it's ineffective.
I guess that's why. Why, right?
For sure.
Not only is it ineffective, it also probably, like, if you saw yourself doing this in a replay, you'd be like ashamed, right? You'd have to change your move. So this is James Scott of the Chicago Americans from the White Sox. So there's a little bit of stuff out there about James Scott. But really, what I decided to latch onto was his nickname. His nickname was Death Valley. Jim Death Valley Scott of Wyoming. So, where did this nickname come from? Well, apparently, Jim Scott rolled into Chicago with high expectations and a brand new nickname, Death Valley Scott. He got the nickname in part due to some confusion. So apparently, um, he's associated with being from Wyoming, but he was originally from South Dakota. But really, the confusion was because on the same train that he came into Chicago, there was another gentleman who was named Death Valley Scott. And Death Valley Scott was an infamous Western prospector and con man. So I guess when he rolled into town and people heard that Death Valley Scott was in Chicago and he was on the same train, everybody thought that he was Death Valley Scott. And it stuck. So he just became Death Valley Scott for the rest of his career.
That's so funny. I picture him having like a Three Amigos moment, when they come into Mexico and the bartenders think they're the badass Germans.
Yes.
They're saying, "Good night, ladies."
Oh my gosh. So just to give you some stats, his best season was probably 1915. He won 11 games, lost 4. He had a 2.03 ERA. He struck out 120 guys. He had 23 complete games and 7 shutouts. It was a different time for pitchers. And also one last little interesting tidbit about Death Valley Scott. After baseball, he got into the movie business, into the picture business. He worked for RKO and Republic Studios as a chief electrician, working mainly on Westerns. So that's appropriate, as Death Valley Scott, he ends up working on Western films.
Yeah, that's a pretty specialized career.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, he ends up helping with lighting and just setting up cameras and so on films.
That's no tavern owner.
Yeah. But also very appropriate for the era, the
yes,
late
for
20s
sure.
and 30s.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That's awesome.
Death Valley Scott.
Sweet.
All right. One more, right?
No, I don't have it.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're done. That's pretty good timing though. It's almost 9.
Yeah.
Yes, you're more Happy Valley Scott.
Mm-hmm.
I want to acknowledge this comment because this is a super nice comment. I don't think it's deserved, but I want to share it. Curator material, historical, amazing, and timeless episodes. There you go, Doug. Singing your praises.
And yours.
I don't know that we deserve that, Boston Kid, but I definitely appreciate the comment.
Well, I feel like we really deserve it, Alex.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, just take it in and accept it.
Fully, 100%.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts?
I mean, Joe Jackson, Ty Cobb.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So I mean,
all the people we should have talked about.
My favorite Ty Cobb is in the set. I love that card. It's my favorite card in the set.
Sure.
The Joe Jackson is a legendary card, and I think the most valuable. And then there's also Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Buy Me Some Peanuts and Cracker Jacks.
Yeah.
So synonymous. And I also found out the people who wrote Take Me Out to the Ball Game had never been to a ball game, which is why they didn't care if they ever came back at the end.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like you have to have a Cracker Jack at some point in your
yeah.
Yep. And the tough part, of course, is the expense, right? But I hope, as we kind of went through today, we've talked about this many times, Doug, that you can find a cool looking card, and the story is probably equally as cool as the look of the card.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would imagine that the lower end guys that we talked about are fairly entry level. And
Right.
for this, I think entry level is maybe $300 for a little bit of a beat up one.
Right.
I think that's about entry level.
Right. Which is not an easy card to go for by any stretch of the
Yeah,
imagination. But like if you want a Cracker Jack card, it's not, out of the realm of possibility. So
right.
and they're so beautiful. I mean, I've seen some in person, but I can't wait to get one. Because there's something really special about that red background and the font.
For
And
sure. Yeah, yeah. The Red Heart dog food has like the same kind of striking impact, many decades later. But
yes,
the Cracker Jack, it to me is just like it's like that, but a little bit better. And I love the Cracker Jack
right,
cards, but I think that I'm sorry, the Red Heart cards, but the Cracker Jack is just like another level of awesomeness.
right. So get out there, guys, and buy a Cracker Jack. You can blame Doug. You can also blame me if you want. That's fine.
Yes, you can.
Um,
It was Scott's idea, so
oh, okay, great.
I would say I'm
It,
sorry. It was Alex's idea.
oh, okay.
I'm
Well, I'm
Scott.
fine blaming Scott. It's
I'm just
usually
I was
Scott's
looking
fault.
at this, and
Yeah,
Scott's on my mind. So
right.
anyway, we have with something going now with the haircut award.
I do think so. Yes. We got to find another set that has more problematic hair because everybody's wearing caps in this set. So there were a few that didn't, but most of those guys had good looking hair. It was Connie.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It could get harder. You're right with caps.
Right.
Well, something to think about.
Doug, thank you so much. Fun as always.
Thank you, Alex. My pleasure. I'm honored to
Great.
be on these with you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks everybody for hanging around. Have a great Sunday night. We'll do something again soon next Sunday at 8. So until then, have a great week. Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Good night.